The house still holds the same furniture, the routines are the same on the surface, but the person who used to occupy the other side of the bed, the other chair at the table, is gone. And in the quiet that follows, a specific thought tends to emerge, not immediately, but with time and with force. The thought is not about logistics. It is not about legal arrangements or divided assets. It is about identity. It is the sense, sometimes spoken aloud and sometimes only felt, that the end of this marriage is evidence of personal failure. That response is not unique. It is, in fact, one of the most consistently documented psychological reactions to late-life divorce, and understanding what drives it matters, because it shapes what happens next. Researchers who study divorce in midlife and beyond describe a phenomenon they call identity disruption. In long marriages, a person's sense of self becomes structurally connected to the relationship. The longer the marriage, the more entangled those two things become: who you are and who you are within that partnership. When the partnership ends, the psychological experience is not simply loss, it is disorientation. The self that existed in relation to another person no longer has its reference point. This is why late-life divorce tends to register as a more destabilizing event than divorce at younger ages. A person in their 20s who separates after 3 years has lost a relationship. A person in their 50s who separates after 28 years has lost a large portion of the architecture of their identity. Clinical frameworks for grief have long categorized the end of a long marriage alongside bereavement. The psychological and physiological responses are comparable. The same cognitive disruption, the same disruption to sleep and appetite, the same difficulty concentrating, the same intrusive thoughts. The difference is that divorce carries an additional weight that grief over a death typically does not. That weight is shame. If this is reaching something in you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps this content reach others who are going through the same thing and need to hear it. The social narrative around late-life divorce is rarely neutral. There is an implicit assumption embedded in public perception that a marriage which lasted 20 or 30 years and still ended must have failed due to something preventable, something correctable, something one or both people should have managed better. That assumption is rarely stated directly. It doesn't need to be. People who have gone through a late-life divorce report, feeling it in conversations, in the expressions of relatives, in the way the subject gets changed. Research on self-esteem following late-life separation consistently documents a significant decline in self-worth during the first 1 to 3 years after the divorce. This decline affects both parties, the one who initiated the separation and the one who did not. The psychological experience differs between them, but the erosion of self-esteem appears on both sides. For the person who did not see the divorce coming, the damage tends to center on rejection. The end of the marriage gets retroactively applied to the entire history of the relationship, raising questions about what was real, what was genuine, what was missed. These are not rational conclusions drawn from evidence. They are emotional responses to a rupture that feel like conclusions. For the person who made the decision to leave, the experience is different but equally complex. Many describe sustained guilt, a mourning for what they themselves chose to end, and a confusion that is difficult to articulate. The awareness that choosing something does not protect you from grieving it. Across both groups, researchers have identified a common psychological threshold, the point at which the central question shifts. In the early period following divorce, the dominant question tends to be retrospective, focused on what went wrong, what could have been done differently, whose fault it was. Over time, for those who move through the grief rather than around it, a different question begins to emerge. Less about the past, more about what comes next, and who the person is outside of the relationship they spent decades inside. That shift is not automatic. It does not follow a fixed timeline, and it does not happen in isolation. Studies on post-divorce recovery consistently point to the quality of social support as one of the strongest predictors of long-term psychological stability. People who maintain or rebuild meaningful connections in the years following a late-life divorce show measurably better outcomes, emotionally, physically, and in terms of reported life satisfaction. Conversely, isolation, which is a documented risk factor for divorced adults over 40, particularly men, is associated with prolonged depression, declining physical health, and a reduced likelihood of rebuilding a stable sense of identity. The feeling of failure, when left unexamined and unsupported, tends to become self-reinforcing. It discourages social engagement. It narrows the range of experiences a person is willing to pursue. It reframes every new difficulty as confirmation of an already held belief about personal inadequacy. Studies on post-divorce depression in middle-aged and older adults have found that the internalized belief of having failed is a stronger predictor of long-term psychological struggle than the divorce event itself. Longitudinal research on resilience following late-life divorce introduces a complicating finding. When researchers followed groups of divorced adults over periods of 3 to 5 years, a significant portion of participants reported higher levels of personal clarity and self-awareness than they had experienced in the final years of their marriage. Some reported greater life satisfaction. These outcomes were not universal, and they were not reached quickly, but they were consistent enough across studies to be documented as a pattern rather than an exception. What the research describes taken together is a process, not a fixed outcome. The psychological damage of a late-life divorce is real, measurable, and serious. So is the capacity for recovery, given time, support, and a willingness to engage with the process rather than shut it down. If you have found this video useful, subscribe to the channel. Every week, we look at the emotional and psychological dimensions of major life transitions, with the same level of seriousness and the same absence of easy answers. Leave a comment below, not to share a success story and not to perform recovery, simply to mark where you are right now. Many people watching this are in the middle of the hardest part, and knowing that others are in the same place, that is not a small thing. The next video examines what research shows about social isolation after late-life divorce, who is most affected, why the isolation tends to deepen in the first 2 years, and what has been shown to interrupt that pattern. That is coming next week.